Hey guys, we are going to start a new series today that focuses on alternate poses and practices both for beginning a private lesson and for ending a private lesson or group class. These can be used in group classes as well. Just overall, here's my theory about beginning private lessons with spine tall, legs crossed, hands on knees, eyes closed. I have seen often in my experience that does not always have the intended benefit of helping students turn their attention inward and focus on their inner life and their inner experience. If they're new to yoga and it's just the two of you, talking them through a centering in that kind of formal, sometimes very vulnerable setup just doesn't. They might do it, but I've often seen that it doesn't quite have the immediate effect of turning the senses inward that we might want it to, or settling down, or sensing how they're feeling and choosing an intention for practice. I just think it's hard for people to do that sitting in that way because it feels too vulnerable, it feels too foreign, and it feels too formal. So I have a lot of alternative beginning practices. Today I'm actually going to show you an alternative closing practice. So this is something I do with private clients, and this is also something I do a lot in my group classes. If you come to my group classes, you will see that I don't teach that many seated poses, especially in my level 1-2 class. I certainly teach some sometimes. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with seated poses. I love seated poses in my own practice, but I think it's really like a cultural phenomenon. Everybody sits too much. We sit in the car, on the bus, on the metro, on the way to work. We sit for 8 to 10 hours in a computer chair in front of the computer. We sit back in our commute home. Maybe we stand up when we make dinner. We sit down in a chair at a table to eat dinner. And then finally it's time to relax and we sit down on the couch in front of the TV. If you don't on purpose put other kinds of movement in your life, I think we spend like 80% of our days seated in chairs. So for that reason, I don't teach a lot of seated poses. I just think everybody already sits enough. Also, if we're going to say, and you might disagree with me, but just generally speaking, that the intended benefit of doing seated poses, let's say at the end of class, it could be a seated twist, even more likely maybe a seated forward fold. If we're doing that because we want people to start to settle down from a more intense practice and kind of the arc of the class is headed downwards and people are going to come to rest in Shavasana, so many students have so much tension in their back body and in their posterior chain that, first of all, it's very hard for them to sit with a neutral pelvis at all. Many people immediately rock back to sit, almost on their sacrum. Blankets certainly help that, but it's not a cure-all. So a lot of people are still sitting behind their sitting bones and then rounding forward, and there's just tension, right? You see it. There's tension in their neck, in their shoulders. They might be wishing they could fold further forward than they can. It just doesn't, to me, look like it often, not to say that it can't, but especially, again, in my level 1-2 class with people who have done less yoga, maybe in general are a little bit less movement-oriented than people who are in other more advanced yoga classes or just have more movement in their lives in general. It just doesn't seem like it has the intended benefit of helping them quiet down and prepare to rest. So I like to do things that maybe help release the tissue in the back body, get a feeling of softening, of letting go in some of that tension that we find in the posterior chain, without asking people to do a forward fold. There are 1,000 different ways you could do this. I'm just going to show you one that I like. So we call it calf smasher. This may be from the Anusara tradition. I don't know where this came from. I can't remember when I first learned it. Lots of people do this. I didn't invent this. But you take a blanket like this, and I actually think it's good to open it up to this size. I think it rolls a little bit better. And you make a big fat roll. And I like to start the roll at the fringe side, because I'm sort of finicky like that. So you roll the fringe in. Until you get a nice big thick roll like this. Move back. And then the blanket is going to come behind the knees. So to do this, and if people have a lot of tension in the tops of their feet, you can also have them put a small roll underneath their ankles or underneath their feet in general, just so there's a little bit more softness there. But for now, I'm just going to use the one blanket, and then I bring the crown of my head to the floor. Jam, really gotta get it in there. Jam the blanket up in between the calves and the hamstrings. When you come up to sit, it kind of slides back sometimes, so you really try to keep it forward as much as you can to start. And then you try to come up to sit. For some people, this is going to be crazy, crazy intense and not relaxing at all. And so if it's a private client, you're not going to give this to them at the end of class, right? This might go somewhere more in the middle. But for some people, it just really feels like a nice, deep release of the calf muscles, a release of the hamstrings, and it can be grounding. So to make it a little easier though, I would have people lean forward. If you put all the weight in the pelvis, then it gets more intense. So if it's too intense, I have people put a block forward and lean forward. And if people can though, I like to have them sit up. One thing to watch out for, if this is really, really uncomfortable for people, I see them a lot go into like a really extreme lumbar extension. Let me show you what that looks like from the side. So because it's uncomfortable, to avoid the discomfort, people kind of are like this, and then they're suffering, and they're suffering. And like that's, I don't want people to feel suffering at all. So if they are doing that, I'll have them really lean forward, but take all the extension out of the lumbar spine, broaden across the collarbones, let the shoulder blades melt down, drop the tailbone down. And then just be here and breathe. And if people can come up to sit, then have them come up to sit. And again, though, really make sure that there's not tension, that they're not kind of artificially pitching forward by going into this big lumbar extension, but only have them come up if they can be really nice and long. And then I do this mudra where the dominant hand comes inside, rests inside the non-dominant hand. Thumbs come within a hair's distance of touching each other, resting in the lap. And then you can lead any kind of centering exercise here, any kind of breath practice that might be calming and grounding if that's the energy you want to cultivate. It's also helpful to sometimes have people shift their hips side to side. Sometimes that makes it a little easier and softer to be here. Sometimes that gets into some trigger points that they maybe hadn't been getting into, so it makes it more intense. Again, depending on who your student is, where in class you put this, you can make this more intense or less intense, right, to meet the needs of the arc of your practice. And then lift up and then just move it. It really doesn't have to move much at all to be in a very different spot. Oh, I'm sore. My calves are sore. And then a little shifting side to side and then just resting and breathing and being still. I think it can be interesting to direct awareness to the pelvic floor here. Because you're lifted away from your heels, your seat's lifted away from your heels, there's a little bit of space. You can direct people to breathe in and let their pelvic floor relax. Breathe out and feel a subtle contraction of the pelvic floor. Just notice what that changes in the breath or in the feeling in the calves. So that's what it looks like. And I definitely do this with some of my private clients. I don't have any private clients for whom this is a good replacement towards the end of practice to prepare people for Shavasana. But I do teach an advanced alignment-based vinyasa class that has a lot of really experienced practitioners, including a bunch of teachers. And even though for many of those people, big, long forward folds are pretty easy and kind of relaxing, so many of the people in there are hypermobile. I don't like to spend too much time in passive stretching. And all those people sit in desks a lot as well. So we do some seated poses, but still not that many. And so this was a pose that I did kind of in replacement of a long forward fold in my advanced class just a couple of weeks ago. Gets a really nice release of the hamstrings and the calves. It has this if it's not too intense, it has this very grounding effect. And then we came and we laid down on our back and we did some more kind of quieting, supine twist, stretchy, relaxy kind of stuff. So it's not like I have people do this and then Shavasana, but this is sort of the last upright thing that we do before we move down to supine. So just wanted to drop that into your toolbox. Let me know if it makes sense, if you try it, how it goes, and any questions you have. Okay, bye for now.